Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Walid Ghali, and I'm Associate Professor of Islamic and Arabic Studies at the Aga Khan University and head of the Aga Khan Library, London. And it gives me a great pleasure and delight to introduce this talk today by the Islamic Manuscript Association, organized by the Islamic Manuscript Association and led by Dr. Annabel Gallop. And I'll just quickly give you a brief introduction of Dr. Gallop before I leave the floor to her. So Dr. Gallop received her PhD in 2002 on Malay seals and published the Catalogue Malay seals from the Islamic world of Southeast Asia in 2019. And she was elected to become fellow from the prestigious British Academy in 2019. Dr. Gallop joined the British Library in 1986 and has held the positions of curator for Maritime Southeast Asia and head of the Southeast Asia section. Her research focuses on the British Library's Malay collections, writing traditions, book cultures, and the art of the Qur'an in Southeast Asia. And the Indian Ocean, Malay and Indonesian manuscripts, letters, documents, and seals, and comparative Islamic diplomatic. She curated the exhibitions titled, I quote, Early Malay Printing, 1603-1900, and Golden Letters, Writing Traditions of Indonesia, 1991, and The Legacy of Malay Letters in 1994. She co-directed the British Academy-funded research project, Islam, Trade, and Politics across the Indian Ocean between 2009 and 2012, which investigated Ottoman links with Southeast Asian section. And finally, Dr. Gallop, and for my surprise, maybe for you as well, was senior producer for the Indonesian and Malay section of the BBC World Service from 1985-1986. It shows how talented and well-versed Dr. Gallop. Just a quick selected publications. I can't share with you everything that Dr. Gallop wrote about, but I just made a quick selection of some of her publications, like the Malay seals from the Islamic world of Southeast Asia, published 2019, and Indonesian manuscripts in Great Britain, a catalogue of manuscripts in Indonesian language in British public collection, 2014, and Lasting Impressions, seals from the Islamic world in 2012, and The Legacy of Malay Letter in 1994, and finally, Early Views of Indonesia in 1995. 1995. And you can have access to a full list of publications either on Dr. Gallop's academia website or ResearchGate or her webpage on the British Library. And in today's talk, visit to a collection series led by Islamic Manuscript Association, and this is the second talk in this series. Dr. Gallop will speak about Islamic manuscripts from Southeast Asia in the British Library collection. The Asian and African collection of the British Library hold books and manuscripts, as you most probably you know, from all parts of Asia and Africa in hundreds of different languages. From Southeast Asia, Islamic manuscripts may be written in a range of languages as well, including Arabic, Malay, Javanese, and Lampung, and may range in form from volumes of paper and bundles of palm leaf to concertina-shaped books written on folded strips of tree barks. For this virtual visit, Dr. Annabel at the British Library in London and member of the board of directors of the Islamic Manuscript Association, will present and highlight of the British Library collection of Islamic manuscript from Southeast Asia. Before I leave the floor to Dr. Annabel Gallop, I just want to highlight that this talk is interpreted into Arabic and English, which could be heard on individual channels selected from Global Icon. Also, the event is being recorded and will be available on the association's webpage and YouTube channel. Just for your information as well, the association, TIMA, the Islamic Manuscript Association, is organizing this event in collaboration with the British Library in the UK. Finally, before I leave the floor, we welcome all of you and welcome Dr. Gallop, and we look forward to hearing you, Dr. Gallop. So please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Walid, for that very kind and generous introduction. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here this morning. Well, this morning in London. I know it might be midday in Cairo and afternoon in Indonesia. So this lecture is part of, I'm going to share my screen now. I would like to, this lecture today, well, it's not a lecture, it's a talk today, is part of the new TIMA, the Islamic Manuscript Association series called Visit to a Collection. So although you are not in London with us, for all of you, I hope to perhaps give you a bit of flavour of the manuscripts that you will be seeing today, where they are held. So this is the British Library based at St Pancras in London. It is the National Library of the UK, and its home is still quite new. It was opened in 1997. So the very old building you see to the right of the screen is, which looks like Hogwarts School, is not the British Library. It is St Pancras railway station, and the British Library is the new building in the foreground. My colleague, Dr. Walid Ghali's university, the Aga Khan and the Aga Khan Library is just very close, about 5 minutes walk away behind on the other side of the train station. So if you come to London, and you might arrive at Heathrow and come by tube or come by Eurostar from Paris directly to St Pancras station, and as you enter the front, the front entrance of the British Library, if you have heard about the British Library, you might expect to see this, the round reading room. But please don't, because you will be disappointed, because this is the old reading room of the British Museum Library. So the British Library used to be part of the British Museum for more than 200 years. The British Museum was founded in 1753, and it had a very large library, and this was the famous round reading room constructed in the 19th century, where Karl Marx and José Rizal and many other luminaries studied. But in 1972, the library was separated from the British Museum and became an institution in its own right, and moved into its new building at St Pancras in 1997. And this is our entrance hall, so a bit more modern, but I hope you will find it also uplifting and beautiful. And when you walk into the British Library through the front entrance, what you will see in front of you really is quite inspiring. It is the King's Library, which is the personal collection of King George III, which was given to the nation by his son, King George IV, in 1823. It was the personal library of King George III, one of the largest libraries in Europe, and now it forms part of the British Library collection, and the architect of our building at St Pancras designed this special stack in the middle of the building to house the collection of the King's Library, the collection of George III. But we are not a museum, we are a living, breathing library. So any of these books can be recalled or requested for consultation in one of our reading rooms. They're not just for show, they are to be used and to be read. Now, there are 11 different reading rooms in the British Library at St. Pancras, some for specialist areas such as maps, music, rare books. But if you are interested in Islamic manuscripts, you will probably climb the stairs or go up in the lift to the 3rd floor, and you will come to the Asian and African Studies reading room, which is where you can consult manuscripts and books from Asia and Africa. In the British Library, the primary organising principle for collections is by language. So we have curators for languages like Persian, for Turkish, Armenian, Chinese, and Japanese. The curator for Arabic is responsible for all books and manuscripts written in Arabic, wherever they were produced in the world, whether in Africa or in Turkey, in Iran, in India, or indeed in Indonesia. So I am the curator for the vernacular languages of maritime Southeast Asia, which covers the countries of Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, the Philippines, and East Timor, so basically the island world of Southeast Asia. There are hundreds of languages spoken in this region, but only about 15 or so have produced written traditions, so manuscripts and books in those languages. In total, in the British Library, we hold just over 500 manuscripts from this region, written in languages like Malay, Javanese, Old Javanese, Bugis and Makassar from the island of Sulawesi, Batak from North Sumatra, Balinese, Lampung and Achenese, also from Sumatra. And if you want to consult manuscripts from this region, the most important reference work is this catalogue by Rickleff and Voorhoeven, which lists all the manuscripts in Malay and other Indonesian languages, not just in the British Library, but in all public collections in the UK. So it's a very, very useful guide to all the manuscripts from this region. However, it does not include manuscripts in Arabic from the region, and manuscripts in Arabic are arguably the bedrock of intellectual traditions in Islamic cultures. So I've spoken so far about regions and countries and languages regarding collections in the British Library, but not about religions. So in the British Library, we have language curators. We don't have a curator for the Islamic collection or say a Buddhist collection or even the Christian collection. And when I'm asked to give a talk about the collections for which I'm responsible, I normally talk about Malay manuscripts or Javanese manuscripts or Batak manuscripts, or even about Qur'an manuscripts from Southeast Asia. And so, to be honest, this is probably the first time I've been asked to give a talk on Islamic manuscripts from Southeast Asia for this TEMA series. And it made me really think, what are Islamic manuscripts from Southeast Asia? What is it that makes a manuscript Islamic? Now, I'm not going to try and give a simple or even a very extensive, complicated answer to this question. But what I'd like to do today is to show you examples of some indubitably Islamic manuscripts, which might nonetheless surprise viewers with their very unusual range of scripts, layouts, forms, and materials. But at the heart of all Islamic manuscript cultures is the Qur'an, the holy book of Islam, which is written in Arabic. And this beautiful example in the British Library, shown here, is from the northeast coast of the Malay Peninsula. And from its artistic style, we can tell it's in the Patani style. So it is either from the region of Patani, which is now in southern Thailand, or the region of Kelantan, which is now in Malaysia. You see, when we talk about manuscripts, modern political national boundaries are sometimes a hindrance rather than a help. So from the artistic style, we can locate the geographical region where a manuscript comes from, and it might cross over current national boundaries. This manuscript was probably written in the mid-19th century, and in fact, about 90% of all Southeast Asian manuscripts surviving today, and most of the manuscripts I'm going to show you today, date from the 19th century. This is probably due mostly to the tropical climate and other associated environmental features in Southeast Asia, like frequent flooding, earthquakes and fires in the region. But it's also probably linked to questions of availability of writing materials like good quality paper. So in general, Islamic manuscripts from Southeast Asia are relatively younger or newer than many other Islamic manuscripts from other drier regions, such as in the Middle East. Southeast Asian Qur'an manuscripts like this one typically only have these finely illuminated frames at certain key places of the volume, at the beginning and at the end of the book, but most of the other pages are relatively plain. But East Coast Qur'an manuscripts like this one, so manuscripts produced on the long east coast of the Malay Peninsula, they always follow a typically Ottoman style of page layout with 15 lines per page, and a very systematic presentation of the text, whereby every single juz or 30th part of the Qur'an fills exactly 20 pages or 10 folios of paper. So this is a very regular layout of the text, and it greatly enables readers who try to memorize the Qur'an to have such a clear layout. But what it means from an artistic point of view is that every 20 pages, you will get a beautiful ornament at the top right corner of the page, marking the start of a new juz. And these juz markers placed in the margin are some of the artistic highlights of Qur'an manuscripts from the east coast of Malaysia. So here you see a range of the juz markers from this Qur'an. They are all constructed along the same basic pattern, but each one is different in terms of its color, choices, and little details of decoration. Now, it might surprise people to know that there are, in fact, very few Qur'an manuscripts from Southeast Asia in the British Library. By far the largest collections of Qur'an manuscripts from Southeast Asia are still held in Southeast Asia itself. And this is because the colonial officials responsible for the collections of Southeast Asian manuscripts now in the British Library were deeply interested primarily in historical and literary texts from the region, but had very little interest in Islam, and in fact even in general an antipathy to Islam. And so they very rarely collected Islamic theological works or works in Arabic, manuscripts in Arabic from Southeast Asia. And so the British Library currently has 8 Qur'an manuscripts from Southeast Asia only in its collection, of which most of these were acquired relatively recently. 3 of the Qur'ans come from Aceh on the northern tip of Sumatra, which is one of the most renowned kingdoms and the most staunchly Islamic regions of Southeast Asia, with a very, very rich manuscript tradition. This is the finest of the 3 Qur'an manuscripts from Aceh in the British Library. Most Qur'an manuscripts from Southeast Asia do not include colophons. This is the part of the text which gives you information on who, how, where, and when the text was written or created. So we have no way of dating or knowing anything about who wrote the text and where it was written, and we have to judge this from the material features, from the artistic style and the materials used in the Qur'an itself. And this manuscript from Aceh is written on English paper, which has a watermark of 1819, which is the date that the paper was made. Now, it's well known that paper was normally used within a few years of its manufacture, certainly within about 8 years, one of the experts has on Malay manuscripts has estimated. And so we can fairly firmly date this manuscript to probably the 1820s. Like the Patani Qur'an I showed you, it only has a few illuminated pages. This is the beginning of the Qur'an, and these are the final pages. And they are illuminated in a typically Aceh style, with a palette which is always focused on red, yellow, black. But the most important color in this illumination is white, which is not the color of a pigment or an ink, but it's the white of the paper, which has been left uncolored. We call it reserved white. And in manuscripts from Aceh, Qur'an manuscripts from Aceh, this white is the most important color in the artist's repertoire, and it's used to pick out the main motifs of the decoration. Aceh Qur'ans never include gold in the illumination. You will see lots of gold on other manuscripts I'm going to show you, but it is a feature of Acehese Qur'an manuscripts that they are never illuminated with gold. Like the Patani Qur'an I showed you, most of the pages in this beautiful and very well designed manuscript are relatively plain, but here too there are very large, elaborate marginal ornaments marking the start of a new juz, but we also have a whole range of different ornaments marking parts of a juz, half or a quarter or an eighth. And even more distinctly than in the Patani Qur'an, you can see across the top that they are all constructed on a pattern of concentric and interlocking circles, and with a very limited palette of red, yellow, black, and reserved white, but producing an infinite variety of patterns and different shapes and designs. And in this manuscript, not a single marginal ornament is the same. Every single one is slightly different. So we move on to 2 Qur'an manuscripts from Java in the British Library. The ones I have shown you from Aceh and from Patani were written on high quality European paper, and which is very white and very smooth, quite expensive, but a very, very fine support for the most noble of books, the Qur'an. Paper was made in Southeast Asia, in Java, and this manuscript, this Qur'an manuscript, is written on Javanese paper, which is called duluang. It is made from the tree bark of the paper mulberry tree in Java. It's technically not paper because the dictionary definition of paper is a material made from an aqueous solution. So when you dissolve vegetal materials in water and then create sheets of which when dried you can write on. But luang was not made with this aqueous method. It is made by pounding and smoothing tree bark. So you get a very smooth paper, but as you can see, it's rather brownish in color, and you can also see the fibers of the tree bark still visible. So it's excuse me. So it's a very good surface for writing, but it's not as fine and as beautiful to create illuminated manuscripts as the fine white paper which was imported from Europe. These are the 2 older Qur'an manuscripts in the British Library from Java, which were brought back from Java in 1816. They are both quite plain, but they are very typical. And so in Javanese Qur'ans, we find that one typical way of indicating the start of a new juz is not with an ornament in the margin, as you saw in the previous examples from Aceh and Patani, but very often with 2 semicircles attached to the borders, the vertical borders on each page. And the actual point in the text where the new juz starts is marked with some kind of of visual ornament, in this case with 3 small red circles. So this is a very typical way of announcing a new juz in a Javanese manuscript. And if you see these 2 semicircles on a page, that's a good indication that the Qur'an is from Java. I mentioned that the British Library holds very few manuscripts in Arabic from Southeast Asia, but we do have this very, very fine manuscript also from Java with a lot of gold. It is a Kitab Maulid, and the text is an anonymous text, the Maulid Sharaf al-Anam. It's written in Arabic. This is the large script, but it has an interlinear translation in Javanese, in Arabic script. And this manuscript is written on European paper in about the 1860s in Java. So contrasting that with the Qur'ans earlier, you can see what a range of different styles of manuscripts that you can see just from one island alone in Southeast Asia, from Java. But I'd like to move on to Malay manuscripts now. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the great strengths of the British Library collection is literary manuscripts in Malay. And so the Malay language it played a particularly important role in Southeast Asia as the lingua franca throughout the whole region, where many different, hundreds of different languages were spoken, like Javanese, Bugis, Makassar, but Malay was the language of communication for the purposes of trade, diplomacy, and also for the spreading of religion. And I love this map, which is taken from the first Malay English dictionary published in London in 1701, because it sums up this region and the special role of Malay in linking what you can call the Malay world of Southeast Asia, a map of the countries wherein the Malayu language is spoken. And this rather simple, plain-looking manuscript is one of the most important Malay manuscripts in the British Library. It is a copy of the Hikayat Raja Pasai, the Chronicle of the Kings of Pasai. Pasai is the kingdom in North Sumatra, which was the first Islamic state in Southeast Asia. Islam arrived and was adopted by the king of Pasai probably in the 13th century, in the early 12th, probably the mid 1250s or so. And this manuscript, this text was probably composed in the 14th century, and it tells of the coming of Islam to Pasai. Only 2 manuscripts of this text are known, the Hikayat Raja Pasai, and one is in the Royal Asiatic Society and one is in the British Library, this one. And this is the earlier of the 2. It's dated 1797, so it's about it's several centuries after the composition of the text, but it's the earliest known recension of the text. It has been much read, much loved, as you can see from the smudging of the paper. So it's a very, very important witness to the coming of Islam to Southeast Asia. We also have a large number of other manuscripts in Malay in the British Library, mostly Malay literary works, many of which are overtly Islamic, with tales of Islamic heroes like the Hikayat Muhammad Hanafiya on the top left here, the Hikayat Nabi Yusuf, the much-loved story of the Prophet Joseph. This manuscript on the bottom left is from the estate of Perlis in the Malay Peninsula, copied in 1802. And on the right, a very fine manuscript of the Tajus Salatin, the Crown of Kings, which is an Islamic mirror for princes, an ethical guide to good Islamic governance, written in Malay. So that is a work that was composed in Aceh in 1603, but this particular manuscript was copied in Penang in 1824. So you can see again that we have Malay literature is a very old literature, but most of the witnesses to the literature only date from the 19th century that are held in collections worldwide at the moment. But sometimes it is easy to assume, just from a quick glance, that because a manuscript is in Arabic script and illuminated in accordance with pan-Islamic world conventions of double frames arranged symmetrically across 2 open pages, that it must be an Islamic manuscript. So how would you categorize Malay literary works which were copied for reading and listening audiences in Islamic societies and Muslim societies, but with stories that are based on older Hindu prototypes, such as this Malay Hikayat Perang Pandawa Jaya, which is the story of the War of the Pandawa brothers, taken from the Mahabharata, but written and reimagined in Malay. Or other stories taken from the Javanese cycle of Panji tales, and these are also pre-Islamic stories about Prince Panji, who roamed far and wide in search of his beloved, encountering monsters, magic, and gender-shifting protagonists along the way. Now, this is an issue which Malay Muslim societies grappled with over the centuries. And in early 17th century Aceh, visiting an immigrant, very orthodox cleric, Nuruddin Araniri, of Arab and Gujarati heritage, he wrote the Sirat al-Mustaqim, which is the first Malay handbook on fiqh, so giving practical solutions for the application of Islamic law to everyday life. And he decreed that Malay stories like this, such as the Hikayat Indraputra, full of romances and dragons and magic, were only fit for use in the lavatory. But we find a very different and sort of conciliatory and subtle approach taken by the 18th century Malay scribe of this manuscript on the screen, which is the Hikayat Cekal Wanang Pati, which is a Malay tale based on one of these Javanese Panji stories. Because at the beginning, or these are the first pages at the book, and the text begins here, but across the top, the scribe has written a kind of spiritual health warning. He's advised his audience not to believe the story too deeply. He says, "Will all readers please make sure not to take this book to heart, because it's really just a pack of lies. And will you also please stress to your listeners on each page that you should not believe it." Now, I know there are probably quite a lot of people in the audience from Indonesia and Malaysia, so I'll just read out what he wrote. "Maka hendaklah tuan yang membaca surat ini jangan menaruh iman di dalam hati, karena semata segaliannya itu dusta belaka, all lies. Dan lagi tuan-tuan kata akan pada sekalian orang yang mendengar surat ini, who listen to this story." So these manuscripts were not designed to be read privately by each person. They were read aloud to an audience. So please tell your listeners yang mendengar surat ini, pada tiap-tiap helai tekan pada mereka itu jangan berimankan. So don't take it to heart. And so, and at the start, and so on every page in this manuscript, we find that there is an appeal written at the top. You can see "Jangan berimankan." So in every single page of this long manuscript, at the top it says, "Don't believe this." And at the very beginning of the manuscript, there is a very clear warning: never fail to keep in mind Allah and His Prophet when you read this book. These Javanese stories are just a tissue of fantasies composed simply for amusement by writers, for a different time and a different place. And it's really just nonsense. So, so we see how in this manuscript, which was copied for the reading enjoyment of a Muslim audience, steps were taken to reconcile the content with the faith of the Islamic community within which it was created. So I'd like to turn now from manuscripts which look Islamic simply from the use of Arabic script and typical Islamic book culture characteristics, but where the content might have been contentious or problematic even at that time, to one which would not look Islamic to most viewers, but is deeply, profoundly so. And this is a manuscript from South Sumatra in Indonesia. It's written in the Malay language, but in the Inchung or Surat Ulu script of Indian origin, which reads from left to right. Manuscripts like this from the interior of Sumatra are commonly written on bamboo or, like this one, strips of tree bark folded in concertina form. And this manuscript contains a Sufi poem, the Syair Perahu, the poem of the boat. So this is the first page of the manuscript, written in the Malay language, but the Inchung script. And it is a Sufi poem comparing the mystical path to a voyage in a boat, based on the system of 7 grades of being, or Wahdat al-Wujud. And this poem was formally attributed to the 16th century Sumatran mystic Hamzah Fansuri. However, the scholar of Malay literature, Vladimir Braginsky, has distinguished that there were in fact 2 different poems, both called Syair Perahu, the poem of the boat. Neither of them is by Hamzah, but this one, the first version, which has only survived today in manuscripts which are not in Arabic script, but in Inchung script like this from Central Sumatra, was probably composed in the second half of the 17th century by Shamsuddin of Pasai, a very well-known intellectual cleric and writer, or one of his disciples. There is a second, more well-known version of the Syair Perahu, which does survive in Arabic script manuscripts written in Malay, written in Jawi. I'd now like to turn to manuscripts written in Javanese language, which comprise the largest portion of Indonesian manuscripts in the British Library. Now, the Javanese language can be written in a number of scripts. It can be written in Arabic script in a modified form called Pegon, which, like the Jawi script used for writing Malay, needs the addition of a few extra letters to reproduce the sounds found in Javanese and in Malay, but which are not found in Arabic. Javanese can also be written in Javanese script, and today it's written in Roman script. But this is the first Javanese manuscript to have entered the British Library's collections, because it came from the collections of the founder of the British Museum, Sir Hans Sloane, who died in 1752, and the British Museum was founded in 1753 with his collections, and this manuscript came from his library. It's one of the oldest Javanese manuscripts in the British Library. It's dated 1623, and as you can see, it's written on this very fine Duluang Javanese paper, which has survived very well to this day. It's a text on fiqh, on Islamic law, written in Arabic, and again, we have the interlinear translation and commentary also in Javanese, written in Arabic script in Pegon. So this is a work from the Shafi'i school, and it was written by a Hadrami scholar in the 16th century, Bafadl, and it's a text which is found all over the Indian Ocean world, from the Yemen to East Africa and Southeast Asia. So not surprisingly, Javanese manuscripts in Arabic script, in Pegon script, are usually dealing with unambiguously Islamic subjects. And this is one of the most famous Javanese Islamic manuscripts in the British Library. It is called the Menak Amir Hamzah. So it's the story of Amir Hamzah, the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad, and it's written in Javanese language in Pegon script. But the reason why this particular manuscript is so famous is not really because of the text, because there are many, many manuscripts from Java of the Menak Amir Hamzah, but it's because this is the largest manuscript in the British Library, and possibly the largest Javanese manuscript in the world. It is in a single volume. It comprises 1,520 folios, which yields 3,040 pages. So it's a very, very, very long manuscript indeed. And it always excites a great deal of interest from anyone who sees it. There are also a large number of sort of more mystical Javanese manuscripts in the British Library, which are of a genre called primbon. And these are normally compendia that people might collect together with a text that interests them on things like divination and mysticism, interspersed with a lot of prayers and mystical diagrams. But the majority of Javanese manuscripts in the British Library are not written in Arabic script, but in Javanese script, which is an Indic script, which is read from left to right. And so this is another copy of the Menak Amir Hamzah, the story of Amir Hamzah, but it is written in Javanese script. So at first glance, this might not look like an Islamic manuscript, but it is indubitably so, and it's no less Islamic than the other one I showed you, written in Arabic script. But although paper was both imported into Java, as in this case, this is written on European paper, or made in Java, but we've seen Luang tree bark paper, the standard writing material in Java, as was the case in most of Asia, in certainly in mainland Southeast Asia, Thailand, Burma, Cambodia, and also in India, was palm leaf. So for palm leaf manuscripts, the leaf was taken of the rontal palm and soaked and prepared and dried. And then the text was incised with a sharp stylus, and the manuscript was then inked with black ink. Now, this is a manuscript of the story of the prophet Joseph, which is in Javanese called Carita Yusuf or Surat Yusuf. And it is probably the single most popular Islamic text in East Java, and there are probably more manuscripts of the Surat Yusuf, Carita Yusuf, which survive than of any other Islamic story in Java today. And they are mostly written on palm leaf, and they are sung at celebrations to celebrate the birth or a wedding or a circumcision, or on religious festivals. So this again is a manuscript which might not strike many viewers as Islamic, but it is one of the most important markers of Islamic faith and an important component of Islamic ceremonies throughout communities in East Java. This is a nice manuscript because you can enjoy the little details, the way that the first leaf, the hole through which the book is threaded, after the leaves are written, they are strung together with a string. It is like a buttonhole. It has been strengthened with sewing. And where the leaf has become damaged, you can see a repair. Little splinters have been sewn onto the leaf to repair the leaf. I'll move on to just one last writing tradition from an Islamic community in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, which is not normally, for which Arabic script is not used. And these are the Bugis and Makassar manuscripts from South Sulawesi, a very staunchly Islamic area. But the manuscript traditions of the Bugis and Makassar use their own script, the Bugis and Makassar script, Lontarat script, which again is an Indic script written from left to right. But you can see in this book of poetry that the conventions of decoration from the Islamic world, of double page frames with a decorated headpiece across two facing pages, are emulated and reproduced in this format, albeit not in Arabic script. And this is another very profoundly Islamic manuscript from Sulawesi, written with explanations in Bugis. It's a collection of Sufi texts, and this is a treatise on the 5 prayer times. And you can see that all the annotations are written in Bugis script underneath the diagrams. So what I've hoped to show you today is that not all manuscripts in Arabic script are uncontentiously Islamic, but there are also many Islamic manuscripts from Southeast Asia in the British Library's collection that may surprise you at first glimpse, with their unfamiliar language, script, writing materials, and visual formats, but which nevertheless express the deep faith of the communities in Southeast Asia which created them. And I would also like to end by saying that all the manuscripts I've shown you today are fully digitized, and they can be freely accessed via the British Library website, either through our digitized manuscripts portal. But the easiest way I would recommend is via our blog, the Asian and African Studies blog. And if you simply Google British Library blog, Asian African, you will come to this page, and you can look across the top for the collections of Indonesian and other digitized manuscripts, so Malay and Arabic, Javanese, Bugis and Batak, which list all our manuscripts in those languages with direct links, not only to the digitized version, but also to blog stories which interpret and explain some of the features of those manuscripts. And I hope you've enjoyed your visit to the British Library, and thank you so much for attending this talk. Back to you, Walid.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gallop. I mean, I should say 100 websites, 100 blogs wouldn't be enough compared to your colorful and very, very mind-blowing tour. In fact, I mean, I think everybody would join me thanking you, Dr. Gallop, and I really learned a lot myself. I mean, yes, we're very close neighbor, but I never been able to have a look at this treasure and these colorful practices and collection. So now we'll leave the floor open for questions and answers. So please post your questions on the Q&A box, and I will try to just convey the questions to Dr. Gallop, which if it's in Arabic. There are some in I think Malay or Indonesian language as well. Yeah, I think the very first one by Hani, Dr. Gallop answered it towards the end, saying that everything is available online. You can just visit the website, the British Library website, and you'll have the Asian and African collection. Whatever is digitized, you will find it available online. But also, don't forget to visit the blog that Dr. Gallop was mentioning towards the end of her presentation. You have an invitation, Dr. Gallop, to visit Cape Town to see some handwritten Jawi manuscripts and Holy Qur'an. So I'll leave this to you. I think it's very kind invitation. Ahmed El-Kaf, Ahmed El-Kaf, I'm sorry. Had you got? I think again everything is online. Dr. Gallop, he's asking about the Islamic manuscript. Catalogue of Islamic manuscript of Southeast Asian on PDF. So I don't know. Do you have a recommendation to answer this question?
Not on PDF, but we have it in every. I mean, the catalogue is published in Indonesia. It is that on that picture I showed you, the catalogue by Ricklefs, Hoover and Gallop, which was published in 2014, and it covers not just the British Library's collection, but all the collections in the whole of the UK. But all the manuscripts that I've shown you today from the British Library, all the details are available on our online catalogue. So if you go to the British Library and you look at the Explore Archives and Manuscripts catalogue, you will find all the manuscripts I have discussed are included there with full metadata, with description of the contents and with details of how many pages, etc. So it's all on our online catalogue. So it's up to you to enjoy browsing through our online catalogue to see not just these, but all our other manuscripts in Persian, in Arabic, in Turkish, and in other languages as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I have another question. Would it be possible for you to comment on animal motifs, birds perhaps, on one of the manuscripts? I think it was on the manuscript entitled Karita Yusuf.
Yes, I think it was the one, probably the Menak Amir Hamzah. So it was the manuscript in Javanese script, which is the story of Amir Hamzah, but it had illuminated frames, and within the frames were peacocks. Javanese manuscript art is very, very lavish and imaginative and profound, and many of the elements of the decoration they do have symbolic meaning. I am not the person to ask about this because I'm not an expert on Java and Javanese. And Javanese culture is one of the most, it really is one of the most deeply evolved and most profound cultures. But yes, there are animal motifs, but there are many Persian, Turkish, Arabic manuscripts with, full of animal pictures as well. We know these great compendia of the Ajaib manuscripts and, and literary manuscripts, which also have. So I don't think there's anything uncommon in that. I mean, it is the case that in Malay manuscripts, you would very rarely find animal depictions in the illuminated frames, but it's more often encountered in Javanese manuscripts, both for the symbolic meaning and because there is there's a very, very highly developed tradition of manuscript illustration in Javanese manuscripts. So we have many manuscripts which are fully illustrated. And in the Malay tradition, there are no manuscripts which are illustrated unless they have mystical or magical illustrations. So that's one reason why you get more, you might find, for example, living creatures depicted in the frames of Javanese manuscripts.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Gallop. We have another question from Abdurrahman saying, may I know why many handwritten Qur'an from Southeast Asia lack of colophons?
That's a wonderful question, and I wish I could answer it. Why, I don't know, because it does seem that there are certain categories of Qur'an manuscripts which do have colophons. Now, you see, this is one of the interesting things about the British Library collection. The British Library collection is it's not a great collection. I mean, we have wonderful things, but for Southeast Asia, we have certain strengths and very clear weaknesses. It is probably one of the best collections in the world for the study of Malay and Javanese literature and history. Our strengths are in literary and historical texts because that is what interested the collectors. As I mentioned, the collectors who formed our collections were not interested in Islam. So we have very few Islamic manuscripts in Southeast Asia, I mean, in Arabic and theological manuscripts, and very few Qur'an manuscripts. And because I only showed manuscripts from the British Library today, I was not able to show a wonderful whole genre of Qur'an manuscripts, which are from the Sulawesi diaspora, so linked to the Bugis diaspora from Sulawesi, of which one of the most famous ones is in the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto. And it is, so in those Sulawesi style Qur'ans, there are very full colophons, very, very detailed colophons in Arabic, which list not only the name of the scribe, the name of the patron, the date of the copying of the manuscript, where the scribe comes from. All that information is found in the Sulawesi style Qur'ans, but we do not have an example in the British Library. But it is true that for most, probably 90% of Qur'an manuscripts in Southeast Asia, which are a bit later than the Sulawesi style Qur'ans, which tend to be 18th century or earlier, for the 19th century Qur'an manuscripts, there are no colophons. And I wish I knew. People might simply say, it's quite an easy answer to say, oh, that's because the scribes are self-effacing and they didn't want to put their names in the Qur'an. But that did not apply across the Islamic world. You know, I mean, not in other parts of the Islamic world and not in the Sulawesi style Qur'ans. So it's a great question, but I'm afraid I can't give you an answer. All we can do as scholars is to try and bring the information together and present it to others to see what conclusions we can all draw together. Thank you.
That's great, and I think last week we were in discussion about colophons. I mean, the new book that's been published by
your project, yes.
Yeah, and it's really amazing. Your answer is really amazing because again it connects too many dots, and the final analysis is that we need to do more or further analysis and studies. No one can answer and generalize in any aspect in this area. In fact, it's difficult to generalize. I have another question from Dr. Hassan Abeid saying, do you think the imported European paper was subjected to additional treatment before use? I mean, he's talking about the collection.
This is again a very interesting question, and I think I can say to you no. And this is therefore differentiates the Southeast Asian tradition from some other traditions. I think particularly in India, where or parts of the Middle East where the paper was burnished further before use. You can see that in a very shiny surface in some Arabic and Persian manuscripts, particularly say from India or the Middle East. But in Southeast Asia, imported European paper was not subjected to additional treatment. It was simply cut to the right shape, folded and cut. And very often a mistar was used. So, the standard throughout the Islamic world, the use of a stringed implement, which you press on the page to create ruled lines to help the scribe follow. So, but these are only mechanical means. It was not subjected to additional treatment. So the paper, when you see it, is very matte still. It's not shiny. When it's treated well, it lasts very, very, very well. And so many of the manuscripts are still in very good condition. As long as they're kept away from damp, they have lasted very, very well.
That's true. I have a question, but I think Muhammad Iqbal wrote it in
I will. So from Muhammad Iqbal in Aceh, he asks me, do you have manuscripts in the British Library in Acehnese? As I mentioned, Aceh is one of the the great Islamic kingdoms of Southeast Asia with one of the richest writing traditions. But something that is that's quite interesting is that for many centuries the language of writing in Aceh was Malay, not Acehnese. So Acehnese was the oral language, but all writing was in Malay. So Malay was the language of the court. All the letters, all the manuscripts, all the compositions were in Malay. It's really only in the 18th and 19th, particularly and especially in the 19th century, that you begin to see manuscripts in the Acehnese language. And this is particularly, there's a particular increase in the war against the Dutch from after the Dutch invasion of Aceh in 1873. There's a much larger production of manuscripts in Acehnese, which are linked to the jihad against the Dutch. But in the British Library, we don't have any manuscripts which are solely in Acehnese, but we do have manuscripts which are written in Arabic, Malay, and which have a few sections, a few sentences, parts in Acehnese. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Sorry, I will take only one question from each participant, and just to give opportunity to others. And I promise we don't want to exhaust Dr. Gallop as well. So I promise if there is enough time, we can go back to your second question. So now I will go to Sally. It's wonderful lecture on the Islamic manuscript. I just wanted to know about, is there available any more manuscripts about the Indian culture or Indian Puranas in Islamic manuscript?
Thank you for the question. I'm afraid I can't answer that because I'm not an expert on Indian literature. I have wonderful colleagues in the British Library in the South Asia collection, and I think this is probably more easier to answer with respect to, say, Persian manuscripts or manuscripts from India. There might be an expert on Javanese manuscripts might be able to say whether there's more evidence of that, but I'm very sorry, it's not my subject and I can't answer that question.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gallop. Iman Goma asked about if this collection and the manuscripts within this collection had any influences from Persian or Arabic in the motifs and maybe illumination she means, or it was just restricted to geographical region?
I love this question because this is really my field of interest. I mean, which is really the art of the Qur'an. I say the art of the Qur'an because when I started my work with Malay, I studied Malay literature. So when I came to the British Library, I looked at Malay manuscripts, Malay literary manuscripts. I've always been interested in art, so I looked at the illumination in the Malay literary manuscripts. But little bit by little, I came to realize that the art of the Islamic book starts with the Qur'an, and you really, if you are interested in the decoration and the artistic aspects, you have to first of all look at Qur'an manuscripts. So that's how I started my work on Qur'an manuscripts from Southeast Asia, the artistic study of them. And one question is always of influences, but the first thing I would say is, and this is astonishing, is that the influences from outside the region are not obvious. It's a much, much stronger sense of a very clear indigenous Southeast Asian identity in the Qur'an manuscripts. That is why it is so easy to just look at a manuscript and in 2 seconds I can tell you this is from Southeast Asia. Of course, there are influences. There's the pan-Islamic principles of how a Qur'an should look, you know, with illuminated frames. And for a Qur'an, you do not have living depictions of living creatures in the decoration. Everything is vegetal, abstract, not so much geometrical in Southeast Asia, much more vegetal, but essentially abstract. But so the general principle is that there are fewer foreign influences than might be expected, that most of the manifestations of Quranic art in Southeast Asia reflect indigenous local sensibilities. But within that, if you really kind of begin to tease, you can find some influences. So for example, just along the very rich manuscript tradition of the east coast of the Malay Peninsula, and the finest Qur'ans in Southeast Asia were produced in Terengganu and also in Patani, where I've just mentioned. So along the east coast of the Malay Peninsula, there you do see perhaps a greater degree of Ottoman influence. I mean, particularly in Ottoman illumination, there is a little tiny artistic feature called, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, a tig. I don't think it's tig, which is a little ray that emerges from the illuminated frame, usually in blue pigment, or I mean, it's not in black, it's usually in blue or another colored pigment. Very, very fine series of rays. And this is what you do find on the east coast of the Malay Peninsula and not usually elsewhere. So I would say that there are traces of Ottoman influence in some parts of Southeast Asia, in Qur'an manuscripts in particular, but in others surprisingly not. So Aceh, which is the one part of Southeast Asia which had the closest links with the Ottoman world, in the 16th century, Aceh sent an embassy directly to Istanbul to ask for help against the Portuguese, and there were further links in the 19th century. But if you look at Aceh Qur'an manuscripts, they are wholly vernacular in style. You don't see Ottoman or other influences in the illumination of that. So the answer is variable. In some areas, in parts of Java, in pockets of Java, and in parts of the Malay Peninsula, I can discern Ottoman influences. And sometimes sort of more generic Indian or Indo-Persian influences, but not that many. When you have influences, the natural venue that these influences have probably been absorbed is not in, say, Istanbul, but it's in Mecca, in the Hijaz, because the Hajj was the meeting point of many pilgrims and ulama from Southeast Asia would spend long periods of study in Mecca, and for 400 years, Mecca was under Ottoman jurisdiction. So when there are Ottoman influences, it's most likely that these were acquired during long stays in the Hijaz, even though there might have been some Southeast Asians who traveled up to Istanbul and back.
Excellent. I think there is another related question by Brian Wright. Why was the color palette so specific for Southeast Asian manuscripts? Was it limitations of natural ingredients or a specific artistic choice? Very good question.
Again, these are all excellent questions, and I had to say the research hasn't been done yet. So again, that we're still at the stage of just kind of documenting what there is, and even within the field of Southeast Asia, teasing things out. So in Aceh, we can say yes, they didn't use gold, and this is what they used. Java, there's a very big variety, and indigo, the blue is more prominent in Java than it is in some other parts. Gold is very heavily used on the east coast of the peninsula and in Java. But throughout, probably the one common thread is red. Red is the single most important color in Southeast Asia. It does have significance, but it's also widely available. So I think I'm very, very reluctant to interpret symbolism and give meanings. I think this can be done too quickly. And I'm also even reluctant to transfer symbolisms and meanings from related art forms, for example, from textiles, where a lot of work has been done, into the meaning of colors. I'm not certain one can just say, well, because it's said to be the red represents the life force in textiles in Bima or Sulawesi, that this is the meaning of the red color in a Qur'an manuscript. I think all I would say is that the illumination of Qur'an manuscripts is a very conservative art because of the special sacred status of the Qur'an. It was not an arena for invention. And so what was deemed appropriate in a region is normally conserved and repeated over quite a long period of time, which is why it's a good place to study artistic schools and styles, because you can see quite distinct styles in different regions without the kind of individualism which you find, say, in illumination in literary manuscripts, which makes it much more difficult to interpret what's going on. But I don't think I think so all these questions of limitations of natural ingredients or a specific artistic choice, I think we're still not in a position to be able to answer that.
Excellent, thank you very much. Next question by Dr. Juliet. She's asking about, I think she's asking about the structure, or construction of this collection. How did which library get them, and who made this collection available?
So the British Library collection today comes from two main sources. One is the historic collection of the British Museum, which, as I mentioned, was founded in 1753. And already at the very beginning, 1753, in Sir Hans Sloane's collection, we had 2 Malay, I think 3 Javanese, and 1 old Javanese manuscript. So we had a very small nucleus. The other main source of Indonesian and Malay manuscripts is from the India Office Library and Records, which grew out of the Library of the East India Company, and this only joined the British Library in 1982, quite recently. But it brought with it an equally important collection from Southeast Asia. So the collection I'm responsible for is half from the Old British Museum and half from the India Office. And since they came together in recent years, very occasionally, maybe over the past 20, 30 years, we've purchased maybe about 20 more manuscripts, not very, very few, not that many. But the biggest, probably the critical mass of manuscripts came from a very short period. It came from the British occupation and administration of Java from 1811 to 1816, which was led by Thomas Stamford Raffles, and he had certain senior colleagues, John Crawford and Colin Mackenzie and John Leyden, who were all deeply interested in manuscript cultures, and all of them formed collections of manuscripts in Malay and Javanese and Bugis and other languages. Now, Raffles's own collection is not here at the British Library. It's at the Royal Asiatic Society, also in London. But the collection of John Crawford was sold to the British Museum in 1842, consisting of Malay, Javanese, and Bugis manuscripts, 142 manuscripts, and that large collection is one of the biggest portions of our current collection today. An equally big collection came into the India Office Library from Colin Mackenzie, also formed in Java, of Javanese manuscripts. And so taken together, more than half of the Indonesian and Malay manuscripts in the British Library came just from that brief 5-year period in Java. Some of them were collected from Sulawesi and other places, some of them in British military incursions. It's very well known that the British attacked the Palace of Yogyakarta in 1812 and sacked the library. And the library was divided up between the British officials who were interested. And so therefore 75 manuscripts from the Royal Library of Yogyakarta are now in the British Library in Javanese. Also from the Palace of Bone in South Sulawesi. This is where our collection of Bugis and the 2 Makassar manuscripts comes from. It's entirely from that royal collection of Bone. But the others, John Crawford, he made quite clear when he sold his collection to the British Museum, he said the majority I paid for to have copies made from existing manuscripts. So the majority of the collection, he said, I commissioned myself. So these were new copies made at the request of Crawford himself in Java. So it's a mixture of manuscripts which were commissioned by British officials interested in the topics, and manuscripts which are either purchased or taken in military action, or quite a few of them were gifts. I mean, you know, there's a lot of politicking that goes on, and we do hear of local officials who formed alliances with the British, and knowing they were interested in manuscripts, presenting manuscripts, and many of these are annotated on the manuscript itself, a gift from Kiai Adipati Suro Adimongolo of Semarang, or a gift from the Bupati of Lasem, you know. So the answer, I hope that answers your question. It's quite a variety of methods.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Gallop. And I apologize for all our dear participants and the rest of the dear participants. We don't have enough time to take your questions, but I hope that you enjoyed our talk today, and I hope that you join me thanking Dr. Gallop for this interesting and colorful, fascinating presentation and visit and tour. And it's all combination together. She shared with us her expertise in working in this collection, but also we had like kind of glimpses of the real collection. Thank you very much, Dr. Gallop, for your talk today. And I thank you all participants. Thank you to the Islamic Manuscript Association for organizing this in collaboration with British Library. And for all participants, please stay tuned. The video will be available on the YouTube channel, on the Islamic Manuscript Association website, but also stay tuned for other talks and visits to other collections in the future that the TIMA will organize. Recording will be available. Some of you asked about recording, so don't worry, it will be available very soon on YouTube. I thank you again, and till we meet again, I hope that we see you next time in another visit, in another talk with another collection. Have a good day, have a wonderful evening, have a wonderful afternoon and morning in some places. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Gallop, and I will see you again, inshallah, in the future.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghali, for your very kind moderation. And I'd like to thank Dalia Al-Nashar, Executive Director, and to all of TIMA, and to all participants also for your very stimulating questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.